China has a massive car industry, and in the past it's basically just sold its own cars in its own market, but now it's starting to branch out because brands such as Geely, Lynk & Co and Nio are selling cars in Europe. Also, the European car manufacturers have been keen to sell cars into China because it's such a huge market, and they've built specific cars for China that we don't actually get in Europe. And in this video, I'm going to give you an A to Z list of the coolest cars that China gets that we don't. Let's do it. Buy, sell,
Car wow.
Let's kick off with Audi. It sells quite a few cars in China that we don't get in the UK. One of the most exciting is the Q6. This is a flagship 3-row SUV that's even bigger than the Q7. It's based on the Volkswagen Atlas, which is another massive SUV you can't buy in the UK. But the Audi has its own unique bodywork. It looks similar to the Q7 from the front, although its posh looking light bar is a Q6 exclusive, and the rear reminds me a bit of the Audi e-tron. You can get the Q6 with a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine with 190 horsepower, or a 3-litre V6 petrol engine with 300 horsepower. The price? Well, it costs the equivalent of around £62,000. Then there's the Q5 e-tron, which is based on the Q4, but it's slightly bigger, and it has a range of up to 350 miles. This thing costs about £50,000. Next we have the A8 Horch. Now, Horch is to Audi what Maybach is to Mercedes. It's like their ultimate luxury vehicle. So it's an A8 with extra bits added to it, like a shinier grille, more interior trim, two-tone paint, and just extra loveliness. Now, this thing costs £215,000 in China, though it's only got a 3-litre V6 engine. Why doesn't it have a W12? Speaking of the A8, you know you can get a long wheelbase version of that car in Europe. Well, in China, you can get long wheelbase versions of the A4, the A6, and the A7. Though the long wheelbase version of the A7 actually isn't a hatchback like the European version. It looks like a coupe, but it's a saloon. The last Audi on this list is the Q2L e-tron. L signifies the fact that it's a slightly stretched version of the Q2, and e-tron means that they swapped out the internal combustion engine for electric motor and some batteries. The price of this stretched Q2 electric car is around £30,000 in China. And let's move on to BMW and the i3. Not the i3 as we know it in Europe, that funny little hatchback electric car which I had and loved. It's actually an electric version of the 3 Series, much in the same way that we have the i4. For some reason the Chinese have an i3 as well. Follows the same pattern with like a blanked off grille and some blue bits. Price of this car, £43,000. Then, like with Audi, you can get long wheelbase versions of BMW saloon cars. So you get a long wheelbase version of the 3 Series and a long wheelbase version of the 5 Series. Price for those, £40,000 for the 3 and from £55,000 for the stretched 5. Moving on to Ford, we have this. It's called the Evos, and it's a coupe-like SUV, the same size as a Ford Kuga that we get in Europe. It's powered by a 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine, and it costs around £25,000 when converted from Chinese yen into Great British pounds. Then there's this offering from Ford, the Mondeo. Remember that? We don't get the Mondeo anymore, but this latest version is sold in China, and it's based on the Evos. It has a similar 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine, and it costs from the equivalent of £20,000. The last Ford I have for you is this, the Equator. It's a big SUV with 3 rows of 2 seats, so you get big captain chairs in the rear. It's supposed to be very posh and premium. It has a sort of burlesque feel with that purpley interior. Costs from just over £21,000. Moving on to H and Hyundai, and we have this rather ugly looking thing. It's called the Custo, and it's a 7-seater MPV. It's powered by a 1.5-litre petrol engine. I couldn't be less excited, especially as it costs £21,000, which is the same as that Ford Equator, which looks better. Next from Hyundai, we have the iX25, which is a little bit like the Bayon which we get in Europe in terms of size and the fact that it has those upside down lights at the front, doesn't it? Price of this, £13,000. This thing, which looks like a shark, is called the Hyundai La Festa. La Festa. La Festa. What a crazy name. Anyway, it's an electric car with a range of just over 300 miles. Cost from £21,000. Finally from Hyundai, we have the Mistra, which is a bit like the La Festa, but it doesn't have quite such a silly name, and it's a tad larger. You can get a petrol version, not just electric as well. This thing costs from around £22,000. Now we move on to K and Kia, and this is the G-Power Ace. At least I think that's how you say it. It's essentially the same size as Kia's own Sportage, and it's powered by a 2-litre petrol engine. Costs from the equivalent of £17,500. Next we have the K3, and it's a small saloon car. And you can get it with a petrol engine, and then it costs about £14,000. However, you can get an electric version, and that one is about £28,000. So almost double the price. Finally from Kia we have the KX3, which is a similar kind of car to the Stonic that we get in Europe, and it's powered by a 1.5 litre petrol engine, just like the petrol version of the K3. It starts from £13,000. Moving on to M for Mercedes, and we have a long wheelbase version of the A-Class. And you can even get a long wheelbase version of the A35. Prices start at £28,000. Then there's a long wheelbase version of the C-Class with prices starting from £41,000. And finally, a long wheelbase version of the GLC with prices starting from £51,000. Now, if you'd like to see my favourite drag race involving some Mercedes, click on the pop-out banner up there for the link in the description below. S is for Skoda, and over in China, Skoda sells a long wheelbase version of the Octavia. It's called the Pro, it has a 1.4 litre turbocharged petrol engine and costs from £17,000. They also sell a coupe version of the 5-seater model of the Kodiaq, which looks like this. It's lovely. Why don't we get it in Europe? I'd like it. It starts from £30,000 that, and it comes with a 2 litre turbocharged petrol engine with over 200 horsepower. Finally then we come to the letter V and Volkswagen, and they sell quite a few cars in China that we don't get in Europe. I'm going to start off with this. It's called the Fidian, and it's essentially a larger version of the Passat, only with more luxury. So you get massage seats in the rear and a fridge. It's powered by a 2 litre turbocharged petrol engine with 220 horsepower, and it costs from £42,000. Now, if you'd like to find out how much your car is worth, just click on the pop-out banner up there for the link in the description below to go to carwow, and you can just upload some photos and you can get a value from our dealers. If you want to, you can sell it to the highest bidder from one of our dealers, and they'll come to your house, take your car away and give you the money. Or you can just not bother and just find out how much it's worth. It's your choice. Next we have the ID.6, which is a stretched 7-seater version of the ID.4 that we get in Europe. It's also got a slightly different design. Do you know what? I think I prefer the look of the ID.6. Do you agree or not? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, starting price, £32,000. This next car is the Volkswagen Talagon. It's a bit bigger than a Touareg, looks quite similar to it, and you can get it as a 7-seater or as a 6-seater where you have captain chairs in the rear. It's powered by a 2.5 litre turbocharged V6 and costs from £37,000. Just like Skoda offers a coupe version of the Kodiaq in China, Volkswagen offers a coupe version of the Tiguan in China. It just looks a bit cooler, and on the inside it's a bit more jazzy. Power comes from a 2 litre turbocharged petrol engine and prices start from around £30,000. Next is this, it's called the Teron. It's basically the same size as a T-Roc, but just looks a bit different, and it's powered by a 1.4 turbocharged petrol engine. Costs from around £30,000. Finally we come to the last car on this list, and it is the Volkswagen Lamando. It's essentially a smaller version of the Arteon that we get in Europe, but with a slightly swoopier nose. Quite like the look of it. It's powered by a 1.4 litre turbocharged petrol engine, costs from around £18,000.